Shalom, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Pulse of Israel here in our ancestral and eternal homeland of the Judean hills of the land of Israel. Today, I am with Uri Pilichowski, or how he likes to call himself, Mr. Rational Settler on Twitter. Shalom, Uri. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me on again.
It is a pleasure speaking to you, as always. Uri is a friend. Uri is an educator. This is a very, very important distinction I want to be able to set already at the outset. We are talking about a recent article or blog that Uri put together, 100 things. I'll get the exact title. 100 times President Trump supported Israel. But I'm going to say that Uri puts out information about President Trump. He puts out information about Joe Biden. He is an educator. He wants students to be able to be informed and make rational decisions based on information and facts. So why don't we start with that? How is it being an educator nowadays, giving information about all sides, and yet I'm sure they're not so happy people all the time on both sides seeing what you put out there?
Right, so that's all true. I love education. I come from a long line of educators. My mother, my grandmother, we go all the way back, and public servants. Even my mother-in-law is an educator. So I am a proud educator, and really I see my role as being able to help people, especially students, understand information in context and within the background of history, and understand what's happening without all the noise and all the bias. And I want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable. So I try to give both sides as best as I possibly can.
So why don't we dive into your latest blog, 100 times President Trump has supported Israel. Where did you find all these things, Uri? Now, how many people know all 100 things that you wrote there?
So I didn't have to find them. A couple of years ago, 4 years ago, at the last presidential election between Hillary Clinton and President Trump, I was quite perturbed about how there was very little facts being thrown around. It's mostly conjecture. You know, this is what they are really thinking. I know their true motivations. I know what and nobody's talking about what either of them had done in the past, which is really to me, more so than what they say, and definitely more than the psychoanalysis that everybody gives candidates who they don't know personally. What they've done is really how you judge somebody. So, and President Trump, his whole campaign in 2016 was, I'm a man of my word. I'm going to make promises. I'm going to keep them. So I said, okay, let's start. So on January 21st, 2017, I wrote a blog post saying, this is what President Trump has promised he's going to do. So this is how we should grade him, based on what he says he's going to do. So he says he's a man of his word. He says he's a man of action. He's going to do what he says. And so, okay, this is what he said. So I marked down about 20 things that I expect him to do based on what he said. And then said, you know what, we've got to keep a running record. I don't want to be caught in 2021 trying to, at the last second, trying to figure out if he's done it or not. As he's doing, let's keep a running record. So every time that President Trump or someone from his administration did something about Israel, I wrote it down, and that was it. So it was very easy work, because by the time I wanted to publish it the week before the election, it was basically all done.
So I'd like to just touch upon some of them with you, because obviously the one everybody knows about, everyone talks about, is that he followed through on following American law and the electoral process of every U.S. president since that law was passed back in the 90s for the United States to move its embassy to Jerusalem. Everyone knows about that. Everyone talks about that. What are some of the accomplishments in your list that you believe many people are not familiar with?
Well, there's one that's the biggest one that even if people are aware of it, they do not understand the significance of it. And there's a blog post that I wish I would have been smart enough to see your question ahead of time and had this ready, but I have it ready. And when I put it out, it was no reporters had even reported on it really. In the middle of Jerusalem, and everybody sees it when they visit Jerusalem, there was an American consulate right across from the Plaza Hotel, down the block from the Citadel and the Waldorf Hotel. And nobody really knows what that building is. There's American flags there. You're not allowed to park there. It's all secure. and nobody really understood what that consulate was. That was an American consulate. There was an American consulate in Jerusalem. It was one of two. One was in Talpiot, and one was right there. And that was the unofficial embassy to the Palestinian people. There's in every single embassy of the entire world, in every single country, every consulate in the country reports to the embassy, and their embassy reports either to the State Department or the Foreign Ministry. That was the only consulate in the entire world of any country that reported directly to the State Department and went around. Then it was Ambassador Shapiro and every ambassador before him, and didn't report to them. They operated separately and only dealt with Palestinians. If you were a Jewish Israeli, you could not get an appointment there. To renew your passport, you had to go to Talpiot. No matter the fact if you lived right next door to it, you could not go there. You had to go elsewhere. There was a controversy of it having Arab guards, and there was a time where there were Palestinians given guns by the American government to guard that facility, and that was incredibly controversial. That was the last year of the Obama administration. The Trump administration closed that down as a consulate, sent the consul general home, and turned that into the branch of the embassy and the official residence of the ambassador. So that was a huge move. And then had that the desk there, operate with Jews of Judea and Samaria, which they were not allowed to deal with beforehand. And everybody in the embassy in Tel Aviv was never allowed to deal with Jews in Judea and Samaria because the West Bank was that consulate's department. So the American government was never actually officially allowed to deal with Jews in Judea and Samaria, because the embassy in Tel Aviv wasn't allowed to for geographic purposes, and because the consulate wasn't allowed to because they were assigned only to Palestinians, which meant that nobody on an official basis talked to Jews like me and you who live over the Green Line in Judea and Samaria. It was this nonsensical thing. So that Ambassador Friedman and President Trump changed, and I think that has had an enormous change. I'm proud to say that the first official visit from that consulate, which then the branch embassy, once the embassy was moved, the first official visit to Judea and Samaria by an American official was to our house. So they came to our house, and we had a whole contingent of 3 SUVs, and now we're used to it already. Snipers on our roof, because at any moment you could get a shot at Mitzvah Yericho, which is obviously, I'm being facetious. Within a couple of minutes, all 12 security guards are sitting at our dining room table eating with us. But that's so we've had a number of visitors since then, and that's the biggest change, the consular reporting. There's a lot more to it, and I know I went on for about 5 minutes there, but that's the biggest thing on that list.
No, I'm very glad you mentioned that, because I don't know how many people understood the depth to what you were saying, but it's not about the fact that there was a separate building or what they were taking care of or what they weren't taking care of. It's the fact that the United States State Department for decades had a special line just to take care of the Palestinian Arabs and the Palestinian Authority, no connection, disconnected from the official embassy in Israel, even though there is no official state called Palestine. And we were just touching upon it, but there are a number of levels of problems with that approach, and it was this administration that just solved that. Right. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, and it's important to note that a lot of critics, including Vice President Biden, say, well, now there's no outreach to the Palestinians anymore, that doesn't exist anymore, and that's false. There is. There's a Palestinian desk that now still sits there, and there are more people in the embassy in Talpiot in Jerusalem that still deal with the Palestinians, but individual Palestinians. They don't deal with the Palestinian Authority anymore, because the Palestinian Authority made the decision not to officially deal with the United States anymore. But America, I know those people. They sit there waiting. They're waiting for those contacts. They deal with individuals, but not with official contacts.
Right. No, that's wonderful. So thank you for that example. What else? We got 100. Give me some more that are a little less known.
A little less known. That's I gotta get the list out. That's the big. I should definitely have that ready.
Well, first of all, we'll post the list because everyone should see this list. It's definitely something worth seeing and worth sharing. again, for people to be informed. We both know there's a lot of emotion going on with this election, more than any other election in our lifetime by far. But it's important that those of us who do work with facts, we put the facts out there. Hopefully there are enough people out there interested in the fact. And again, like as an educator, and I'm totally fine, when there is what to say thank you to Joe Biden or recognizing things he has done or things he has said that are positive, for sure, 100%. I'm not into bashing a person just out of emotion. I'm into dealing with the facts. So these are facts for those interested in seeing them and sharing them that can greatly impact people on their decision of who to vote for. This is a fabulous list you put together.
I'll tell you two interesting things. One more thing on that list that I think is important for people to know that they might not recognize, which is that the Trump administration cut off all aid to the Palestinians. Now, there are 4 laws in Congress that were passed in the last 2 years that would have cut all aid off to the Palestinian Authority, no matter what. And the Palestinian Authority made the decision to no longer, this people don't realize, the Palestinian Authority made a decision to no longer accept money from the United States because Congress passed a law that President Trump signed that ties in getting aid, thereby allowing also access to the United States courts to allow lawsuits against the Palestinian Authority for acts of terror that they were responsible for an American citizen, and plenty unfortunately have been killed by Palestinian terrorists. You could now sue the Palestinian Authority in an American court, and the Palestinian Authority would have to sign off on that and say that they accept the jurisdiction. So with the new aid came, so the Palestinian Authority said, okay, we're not going to take aid anymore. But then something that the Trump administration is demonized over is they also cut off aid to NGOs and to hospitals. In East Jerusalem, there's a very popular hospital called Augustus. I can't remember the second name of it, but it's right next to Hebrew U. And they offer chemotherapy treatments to Palestinians at very little to no cost, which sounds very nice. And the American government was giving that hospital $25 million. I'm friends with a congressman who took people to that hospital to show what America was doing to help the Palestinians. My wife has visited nuns that are her patients in that hospital. And so you have to, people say that how could President Trump cancel out $25 million for chemo treatments? How could he do such a thing? And it seems heartless and cruel. And that's one of the things that Vice President Biden is saying to that he wants to reinstate, which seems like a great new policy. So what's the justification behind the Trump policy, which is very simple? And again, it's a value judgment, but the Trump administration says that the Palestinian Authority is spending close to $400 million a year on pay for slay, right? To pay Palestinian terrorists on a sliding scale based on how many Jews they've killed or injured. So the Palestinian Authority has funds, and funds are fungible, right? So they have the funds to pay for $25 million for chemo, and instead of doing that, they're giving it to terrorists. In which case the United States says, listen, if you have the money for terrorists, you can't come to us and say you don't have the money for chemo treatments. Take the $25 million from the terrorist money. So the United States says, we're not going to allow you to have extra funds to pay for terrorists, right? So we're going to stop. So if you don't have any money for chemo treatments, we're willing to pay for it. That's humanitarian aid. But if you have money and you decide to spend it on terrorism, we're not going to cover those bills for you. So that's something else from the list. Something that I'll tell you, just if I can keep going here, but stop me if you want me to stop. I'm a teacher, so it's not to stop. You're just going to have me talk forever. But a criticism that I got from the Biden campaign about this list, because I said to them, they were very upset about this list, and they said, this is an endorsement of President Trump, something that I will not do. I will not endorse a candidate. I will not tell anybody who I'm voting for. But they were very upset about this list, and I said, I don't understand. I'm an Israeli living in Israel. Right? I'm an American citizen, but I'm also an Israeli, and many of these things benefited me personally, not just in some abstract way of security and safety, but a lot of these things actually benefited me personally. So why would I not list them? So their comeback at me was, and again, I don't think this represents Vice President Biden. This is one person who works for the campaign. I don't think he was speaking on behalf of the campaign, but he does work for the Democratic Party. And he said, yes, but this list is only positive from a right-wing perspective. From a left-wing perspective, these are negatives.
So he should be happy that you made that list. That will help get the leftist Jews out to vote for Biden.
Right. So he said, so if you're a supporter of the two-state solution, many of these things on this list are very bad, right? They're not positive for Israel. If you believe the only way for Israel to advance is through a two-state solution, and part of this list is closing down talking to Palestinians, right? Closing the consulate as the example that we gave before. So then you look at this list and you say, these aren't 100 ways that President Trump supported Israel. These are 100 ways that President Trump put Israel deeper into a hole. And he's right. He's 100% right. That's a valid criticism. So I said to him, I said, but I am a right-wing Israeli Jew. I do live where I live. So this is I'm not saying that this is unadulterated, pure. There's no way you could ever come up with something that's positive for Israel 100%, because no one agrees on what direction, no one's going to agree 100%. I said like this, I said, here's how I define what's supportive of Israel. The Israeli people elect leaders. Leaders of the Israeli people then are our representatives to the American nation. We don't all go and speak to President Trump. We have Prime Minister Netanyahu and our foreign minister speak to President Trump, and they ask what they can have. They say, this is what we need, and President Trump has a choice. Does he give it or not, right? It's not supportive if President Trump would say, no, let me tell you what you really need, and that's what I'm going to do for you. That's not support. That's not how allies support each other. So as an ally, the measurement that I use for what a support is this something that Israel wanted or didn't want? And giving what Israel wanted, so many of my friends who don't agree with me politically take a prescriptive approach, which is, no, we know better, and therefore we're going to tell you what Israel needs, and that's how we show support. So I said, okay, that's not how allies work, and that's not how friends work. So,
no, that's a very solid point, and especially, I mean, you could say, okay, when you have Ehud Barak as prime minister, when you have Yitzhak Rabin as prime minister, whatever, when you have a left-wing government in Israel, the Israeli people elected a left-wing government, okay, there is credence to that point of view. But here we have years of a right-wing government of a population that has voted for policies where most of the Israeli population are against the two-state solution. And yet, honestly, it is very demeaning. And I'm using that word seriously. It's very demeaning to hear someone, and in this case, a person on the Biden campaign and many Jews in America say, no. We know the two-state solution is right for you, even though the Israeli population has elected officials and won a policy that has basically admitted that the two-state solution is a failure and it's wrong for the people of Israel. So it's very sad to hear that. I hear it on a political level for sure, but still very, very sad to hear that. But again, if anything, it basically shows how you are looked at as someone in your educational role by your peers on both sides of the aisle, right and left. And for that, I take my hat off to you. So I love your stuff. Big follower. Anyone who is watching and not a follower yet of Uri Pilichowski, whether on Facebook or Twitter, go for it. Always insightful, and keep up the wonderful work. And we're all looking forward for the elections to end, right?
Yes. I'll tell you just one last thing. You mentioned that it was my last blog piece. I put one out this morning, which I'm even more proud of than this one, which is something that my students put together. They've been working on this for about 3 months, and we finished it. Our goal was this week to put it out, and we did. We got it on time. It is a completely factual analysis of President Trump and Vice President Biden's positions on Israel. There's no judgment. There's no favoritism. It's on the Times of Israel on the blogs. It's on my Facebook. It's all over the place. And there's no judgments. It's just facts. And from the left, from the right, you can look at it and you can read what their positions are on 16 different issues, and you can then decide how you feel which way or the other. So only on Israel, but it's 16 different issues where we show the diversity in their opinions, and then you can go ahead and make a judgment call. So that I'm even more proud of than this list, because that as an educator. That's what I really wanted my students to see, to be able to see both sides and then make decisions on their own.
Wonderful. Great job. Yasher Kayach, Uri. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time to talk about us. Keep up your great work.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Everyone, thanks again for joining us for another episode of the Pulse of Israel here on the ancestral and eternal homeland of the Jewish people, here the Judean hills of the land of Israel. Stay safe and stay healthy, everyone. Shalom.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.